in the scope of this rather, simple play, you have the goodies, the baddies, and this middle character. So the baddies are the Burlings, father and mother. The younger generation, through Eric and Sheila, potentially have the idea of change, and Gerald's this halfway figure. Yes, Gerald had an affair, but the inspector says, you treated her humanely. Yes, he's a capitalist, but he shows some sense of having a heart. He's the one that goes away to come back to find out that the inspector isn't real. So he's the kind of reveal character. And how he responds is interesting. He is halfway between. I think what's really crucial to remember is he still wants to marry Sheila. And he feels like, particularly towards the end of the play, there's this sense maybe they could get back together. He's seemingly sorry. I don't know if he could be sorry for that, for what he's done. I don't know if he's as sympathetically portrayed. Like I think that Priestley wants me to think of him as potential, but I've had plenty of colleagues that say to me that he's not that different than the other men in this play, and his privilege is quite articulated throughout. But nonetheless, I'm going to argue here that Priestley uses Gerald as someone who bridges between the hypocrisy of the Burlings and the desire to change for Sheila and Eric. And I really do think of that structurally as what his purpose is. Because in the beginning, he's quite neutral when it, he's posher. His parents aren't there because they see him. Even though they're super rich families, I think they slightly see themselves as marrying, like the Burlings are lower than them. So I think there are these layers of class in the play. I'm just going to add class as a possible context that we would think about with Gerald. I think we should think about gender and the role of both men and women with him, because not only marriage and affairs, but the way he uses his privilege to conceal his affair. These are all things I think we could think about with his character. He takes, now Eva Smith goes by Daisy, he takes her in, he cares for her, he protects her, he feels like a Superman, he feels like someone who's saving her, and Sheila mocks him for that. He sets her up in a house. He says that's not to have a lover, but just to protect her. How much we believe him or not is worth thinking about. They have an affair. We think she, or rather he says he doesn't feel about her the way she feels about him. So we see a misbalance. He breaks up with her, and she moves out, and she calls it one of the happiest times in her life. So, I would argue that Priestley presents him as a complex and contradictory character. And he definitely makes us think about class and gender of the time. But again, I have many colleagues who take a more critical standpoint towards that. If you're thinking about him, his narration of what happened and how he cared for her, his account of her happiness, his account of what it means that she's dead. Then of course there's this thing where Gerald figures out that the inspector wasn't a police officer. So how do we weigh that up in an analysis of him as a character? And when he's not there, the inspector does note he did have some affection for her, and he probably treated her best of all the characters. So this is, again, something to think about in nuancing his character and trying to make him more complex, which is part of the idea of writing about literature, isn't to judge characters or condemn them or argue that they're just simplified. We're trying to explore how the literary text and the character themselves can represent larger ideas in our society and in our life. That's not to say, and you must take critical aspects towards characters. You just need to be quite familiar with the text to note that the author is trying to present nuance, even when you want to be critical and, critique that presentation as well. I think that particularly if you were interested in critiquing him, this idea of coming back to the ring and his marriage of Sheila would be one way in. The other major way, of course, would be the fact that he comes and declares that the inspector was probably false. So, Gerald, straight down the lines, middle character. Like all the characters in this play, if you want to go deeper and in a more complex way, you can.